Good afternoon, everybody. This is Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I was wondering if a member from Fish, Wildlife and Parks, DNRC, and DEQ are on this call at this time yet.
Hey, Doug, Director Tubbs here.
Director Williams as well.
Thank you. Is anybody from DEQ on the line? So I guess we can get started here, and if Sean or Jenny or somebody from DEQ joins, we can make sure we introduce them and get them going. Anyways, as I said, this is Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program, and this is the Trustee Restoration Council to consider Clark Fork Watershed Education Funding Amendment, a 2020 Butte Area 1 funding or amendment to that restoration plan, and for the program to provide its annual updates to the Trustee Restoration Council. Miranda, can we go back one slide, please? So the governor's office representative for this meeting is Riley Summers Flanagan. She is sitting in for Chief of Staff Allie for today's meeting, and she will be running the meeting along with assistance from myself and Miranda. We do ask that all the trustee council members, when asking a question, or if you do have a question, if you could use your raise their hand feature, which is at the top of your screen. At least on mine, it's on the top. Or if you don't have that, if you're calling in and you need to make a comment, if you'd please just politely let us know you have a comment, and we will make sure you get ample opportunity to ask your question. We also want to let everybody know that this is being recorded, and that when you do speak, if you'd please announce your name before speaking so that we know how that works, or who it is that's making the comment. And for the council itself, when we do go to vote, we will call you out individually, Director Tubbs, Director Williams, to make a vote, and then you can unmute yourself and make your vote on as appropriate. So,
and Doug,
that has,
Director McGrath has joined.
What's that? Director
McGrath has joined.
Oh, okay. All right. Welcome, Don. We just started with the introduction, and we do have Riley with the governor's office, who is the chairperson for this meeting.
Great, thank you. It's sorry to be a little late.
Nope, that's fine. That's fine. So you can go to the next slide, Miranda. You can actually go to the agenda, please. So at this point, we'd like to introduce the Trustee Restoration Council. Riley, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm Riley Summers Flanagan. I am Deputy Legal Counsel to Governor Bullock, and I'm filling in for Allie Bovingdon.
Director Williams?
Yes, Martha Williams, Director, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks.
Director McGrath?
Hi, Sean McGrath. I'm the Director of the Montana Department of Environmental Quality.
And Director Tubbs?
John Tubbs, Director of Montana DNRC.
And how about Attorney General Fox? Are you on the line? Okay. Melissa, you happen to be on the line? No, they may join, and if the AG's office does, we will introduce them as well. From our Citizens Advisory Councils, Elizabeth Erickson.
Elizabeth Erickson, I'm the chair of the Butte Natural Resource Damage Restoration Council.
Thank you. And with the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Advisory Council, Bill Rosbeck. Bill, you are out there, correct? I saw Bill. Now we can't hear him. Bill, if you're trying to talk, you have to unmute. Okay, well, hopefully, let's see, I just saw Bill leave, so maybe he'll come back. So I'll go through the agenda quickly here. And as I said before, I help Riley, and we just got Bill coming back on, so I will. Bill,
Hello.
do you want to introduce yourself?
Am I back on? Can you hear
You are
me?
now. Yeah, you are.
Okay,
now.
I don't know. Yeah, the meetings desktop is not that clear to me where I thought I had turned my mic back on, but I did not, apparently. So yes, this is Bill Rosbeck on behalf of the Upper Clark Fork Advisory Council.
Thank you, Bill. So that's the council that we have. And so I am going to help Riley step through the agenda, and the detailed agenda was in the meeting packet that was sent out to everybody or was available on the program's website. We will start out with the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program Amendment, followed by the BAO Amendment, as I said, and then we'll give a financial update and the Aquatic and Terrestrial plans update to the council. I do have to note that Shannon, you can go to, or Miranda, you can go to the next slide. So I will start out, Madam Chair, to present the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program funding amendment. And this is an action item for the council. I do want to recognize that Shannon Gilski was going to present this, but she has become ill. So I have worked with her on this, and I will do my best to step through this process. And we may have a few more questions than you may have if Miranda or Shannon were giving this. But next slide, please. So the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program funding amendment is a proposed amendment to allocate funding of $1 million to or from the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund to the Education Fund. So for the most part, the council probably remembers a lot of the development of the education program and the various documents that we created with the advisory council and the TRC to get to where we are in the Upper Clark Fork. But the Upper Clark Fork Basin Interim Restoration Process Plan, or the final process plan in 2012, was a plan that allocated $4 million to the education program. And the Natural Resource Damage Program put that into a separate fund, the education fund, as we call it. So those dollars were allocated specifically to the CFWEP program to be used by the program for starting in 2014 for at least 10 years, but to last no longer than 20 years. The additionally, the program, or the CFWEP program, would have to come in front of the Advisory Council and the Trustee Restoration Council on even numbered years to present their budget and get approval from the Trustee Restoration Council of that budget. And then the Natural Resource Damage Program would establish the contract for the following 2 years. And if you remember I believe it was early last June, Ray Lynn with the Clark Fork Education Program came in front of the TRC and presented her budget. Following that, in 2020, the Clark Fork Education Program, in discussions with the Governor's Office and NRDP, sought some additional funding. Their funding was projected to run out in 2022, not quite getting to the minimum 10 years. But at that same time, Shannon and the program were evaluating and reconciling some of the funds that we had, especially some of the encumbered funds. And the encumbered funds included the grant projects. And between 2001 and 2011, the program allocated approximately $120 million to about 120 different grants. And those were actually, those budgets were approved in the application process by and went through the AC and the TRC's review process. But the dollars that were allocated to each of those projects was not necessarily entirely spent. Between all that $120 million didn't actually go on the ground. Some projects did not need all of the funding. That funding stayed within the restoration fund. So we reconciled as we got to the end of in the middle of 2020. We reconciled the encumbered grant projects because of all those 120 that were approved between 2001 and 2011, we only have a handful that are left. And there were dollars, there were unallocated funds there. And those are the dollars that we are proposing go to the education fund. So they're within the restoration fund right now. Those dollars that were previously allocated to approved grant projects, but were never paid out because there wasn't a request for those. Those funds we're proposing be allocated to. That's where the funds are coming. That's where the funds are coming from. So we did take this proposal, this amendment, out for public comment. Actually, this slide is incorrect. I put ended in September 10th. It actually started September 10th. And the public comment period ended on October 11th. We used our standard practice for advertising this proposal. It went out to all of the newspapers within the Upper Clark Fork River Basin, including a couple of them up the Blackfoot River, because the education program provides some education up the Blackfoot as well. Next slide, please. At the close of the public comment period, and as you'll see in your packet, there is a response to comment there. We received a total of 25 comment letters. One letter did come in late, so it would be 26 if you added that. All of the letters were supportive of both the funding and of the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program. And many of the comments as you see here, are similar to this. The program teaches both virtual science and history content to the students who are the future stewards of our community resources. As I said, all 26 letters provided the same type of support for the funding amendment as well as the education program itself. Next slide, please. The Natural Resource Damage Program recommends this is our recommendation to allocate the $1 million to the education fund for additional funding through the school year of 2024. Madam Chair, at this time, that's all I have for the presentation of this amendment. If there are any questions from the council, we'd be happy to take those at this time.
I would have one. This is Director Tubbs. Doug?
Yes.
Just could you briefly talk a little bit about their goals for the following biennium that gets us to 2024? Two biennium.
Madam Chair, with that, to answer Director Tubbs' question, I'd like to ask Ray Lynn if she could speak to that.
Sure, this is Raymond Brandel, the director of the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program. Thank you for the questions, Director Tubbs. We are in what I'm calling the metamorphosis of CFWEP with regards to helping our schools transition to being in this blended learning environment where we're both online and in person. And so we've been very adaptive to helping our teachers provide electronic curriculum that they present in their classrooms, providing development of ArcGIS story maps that the teachers can use without us present, and then we zoom into the classroom. We're hoping that this spring we will be on for regular field trips as always. And then the big push for us is to move from having been a largely publicly funded program with grant funds and then funds like these contract funds that we have from NRD, and then we have a lot of contracts with local communities, moving from that publicly funded sphere into more of a privately funded sphere so that we can ensure longevity past that 2024 mark. And that is a big stretch for CFWEP and a big growth for us. We're currently running an online auction and learning all about private fundraising. So that is our goal, is to exceed, be well beyond the 50% match that we have been required for each year of our operation, but be well beyond that, and eventually be moving away from the contract funds. As far as direct programming goes, we'd like to continue with all the schools that we provided service for in the past. We have grown in recent years to working with teachers across the entire state of Montana, and I'm proud to say that the program is being replicated in several communities around the state now, including over in the Yellowstone Watershed in Livingston. We have quite a few teachers in Billings that are replicating now and working more deeply with our reservation schools.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Bill. I'm having a hard time raising my hand. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do, Bill.
Okay. I would like Ray Lynn to give just if she has the numbers available for her right now, to give just kind of the tally of the kind of impact that this program has had for the students, not only in the watershed, but around the state of Montana.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rossbach, for the question. We, to date, well, actually, this is starting in September of 2020, when we finished doing our tally, we had served 64,311 students through this direct service programming. 773 teachers had been involved in our programming in 35 different communities around the state of Montana. And then collectively between ourselves and the Missouri programming, we collected 12 national and regional awards for our program and program service. Now Dr. Green's programming with the Osprey is going, I think we call it going global, because the Osprey programming, the Osprey cams are going just everywhere. He's been recruiting teachers for his NSF funded project, in which we are gathering teachers from across the world now. They're coming from other countries too. And we will continue this work going forward as well in terms of the teacher training and professional development especially. But several of our teacher leaders across the state are using the watershed model to help develop science literacy in their communities and with their students. And I can't tell you how critical scientific literacy has become important to us in this last semester, with people and students especially understanding the scientific process and the integrity of scientific decision making. So that is, the numbers of it. Anecdotally, we were just adding up students who are now have bachelor's degrees or completed science fair projects and won at regional and national science fairs, and who are doing research out in the field. And we're in the hundreds of students that are have been directly affected by CFWEP programming who are now practicing in the field. And That's probably a story that we need to develop more and study more, but it's pretty incredible when we start to look back on that legacy as well. Thank you for that question.
I have one more question. Basically, I'd like Ray Lynn again to maybe expand a little bit about the effect of the pandemic on fundraising in these circumstances.
Yeah, thank you. We started developing we actually hired temporarily a development director for us at the beginning of 2020 in January. And she started working a development plan for us to help us reach out to private foundations, reach out to businesses, such as Atlantic Richfield and others, and help us see what we could get into the program in terms of private funding. And as the pandemic surged, essentially all of those doors just slammed shut. A great example is our relationship with the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation. We were told by that group that since we weren't going to be able to hold a fly fishing camp this summer, to come back and ask next summer. But they were allocating all of their resources to food assistance and food insecurity in the state of Montana. And that's been pretty much the overarching theme with regarding fundraising through the private foundation work. We were able to secure some private foundation funding from Cinnabar. They gave us $1,000 and asked us to match that $1,000, which I think is the beginning of a relationship. We were very successful in matching that $1,000 through private checks from, our supporters and teachers and people that love us. But the private foundations and everything it's been a difficult ask in the last 6 months. We're expecting that to turn as, we get a vaccine on board and the pandemic starts to relax. But it looks like most organizations are giving to the immediate relief of, homelessness, food insecurity, and then of course, providing for frontline support in the healthcare world.
Thank you. I see, Madam Chair, Director Williams has her hand up. Martha, if you wanted to make your comment or ask your question.
Great, thanks. Madam Chair and other members, I also have a question for you, Raylyn or Ms. Brandel, and that's understanding the challenges of both transitioning to online classes and the pandemic, the challenge of fundraising during the pandemic. And I asked this question with the background of really believing in education, thinking it's critical, thinking long term, it's a wise use of money. At the same time, if you could give us just some specifics of how you are planning to move away from needing this type of funding in the future and how you're trying to reach out to others.
Yeah, thank you, Director Williams. Right now, as I said, we are pretty well, we call it the 3 legs of our stool, of our funding stool. And so we have really one very heavy leg in our contract funding. We just put together an annual report that can be found on our website if people are interested in looking at it. And our website is www.cfwep.org. And in that annual report, you can see how things break down in our revenues. And right now we have approximately 62% of our revenue comes from contracts. Around 34% comes from grants, and those are grants that, are federal and state level grants. And then we have these tiny slices, 2% and 1% that are donations, and then the reimbursement, the F&A reimbursement that we get from the campus of Montana Tech every year. So we need to diversify that pie, and I'd like it to be more balanced with about a third, and a third. So if we had a third coming from our contracts, which include the NRD contracts that we have with Butte, Silver Bow, and other communities when we provide service in schools for those communities, and then a third from state and federal grants, and then a third from private funding. That would make me feel more comfortable and like I can sleep better at night. To develop that other third of the pie, that's where our planning with our development director comes in. And the very first piece is to reinvigorate a strategic leadership team that will help me to open doors that we currently don't have open to us. The second part is to make targeted requests from various local businesses, but also national businesses and businesses that have, stated in their portfolios, these are the types of projects that they'd like to fund. When we originally started working with Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation prior to the pandemic, they said that they were willing to work with us on a match grant or a challenge grant, which they would provide approximately $50,000 to that challenge, and then we would go look for the other 50. And in order to gain their 50, we'd have to have come up with that 50,000. So that's the sort of planning that we have envisioned, that we would be starting that process and over the next 2 years, moving that pie to being a third, a third, and a third. Does that answer the question for you?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any more questions from the council? Seeing no more questions from the council, Madam Chair, I would ask for Bill Rosbeck, the Advisory Council Chair, to provide a summary of the Advisory Council's input from the November 18th meeting that was held just recently. And Miranda, can you go to the next slide for Bill, please?
Hi. Thank you, Doug. Let me kind of give a little bit of background and go some historic background here. First of all, we at the council have nothing but the highest praise and accolades for the work of this project. It's remarkable, and I think, there's two things. One, it has tremendous and broad impact. And I will reiterate what Director Williams said, that education, and particularly education about science and the scientific process and respect for science, is, as we all know, something that's is critically needed right now. Second of all, we got to this point where we had to have this major restoration because we were, as a collective community, not paying attention to what was happening to our resources. Hopefully, this projects like the Education Fund will create a sense of stewardship among the population of this watershed and beyond. And those two critical factors have always been at the reasons for our strong support at all times for this project. Looking backwards, I think it's important to look at, we had some questions at the council that deserve some questions about how we were funding this that deserve some background as well. Most of the members of this council, the current council, were put in place in 2009, I believe. And one of the things that was clear to us from the very beginning, that there wasn't enough money to cover all of our needs. And we also realized that we needed to have a very, very rigorously developed long-term plan for how to use the money that we had left. We also realized that what we wanted to do was provide for an allocation of these funds that was tied to the claims that had been made in the lawsuit and the settlement funds that were tied to particular claims in the lawsuit. So in developing a long-term plan, which was first enacted in 2012, we put the highest priority on science-based project priorities. And we feel like we have successfully and rigorously held to those standards. And I think the NRD staff will be happy to attest that our council has really done a great job at really fly-specking the budget to make sure that this money that we have, the money that we have, is used in the most effective ways. The concern that we had at the council was that this allocation of funds was had not been provided for in the main 2012 plan. It was essentially, in some respects, found money. And in that respect, it will not affect in any way directly any of the programs or the funding or the budget for the remaining funds. The problem that we had was, although we fully want to fund this program, one of the questions was we were taking this out of the normal process. We were essentially taking funds. I don't know what the number is. I think the number was something like $7 or $8 million worth of funds that had, as a part of the audit that Doug had said of the 2001 to 2011 projects, the grant projects, that whether we should be funding $1 million out of that 7 million. And so we had a very, very detailed and effective discussion about this and decided that given the emergency, given the need to move this project, move the fund to 2024, that we would agree to make essentially an emergency one-time funding for this project to make sure that it could, survive through the pandemic and move, as Raylyn described, into a more long-term funding. And so the vote at the council, normally our votes at the council are pretty much unanimous. And I think everybody, even those people who had concerns about the funding, for the most part voted for this, despite concerns about that it was being taken out of the normal process. Because we support the program so strongly, the vote was 6-1 with one abstention. The abstention and the vote against was not a vote against CFWEP, but rather it was a vote out of concern for the decision to make this funding outside of the normal process. I mean, I'm willing to answer any questions anybody has of that.
Are there any questions for Bill? So this is Doug Martin. Bill, I'd like to make one clarification. The reconciliation of the grants program, there's about $7 million remaining in the grants that is still encumbered. The reconciliation didn't come up with an extra $7 million. It came up with somewhere between 2 to 3. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood from what you said at the council meeting.
Yeah, and that's fine. I just didn't want to get people's hopes up. There was an extra $6 million out there.
No, that's fine.
There's not.
My apologies for my misunderstanding. I just remember the $7 million fund number.
And Madam Chair, John Tubbs, I'll just make a comment. Just that, Bill, I've got to be on the trustees council now for the 8 years of Governor Bullock's. Just want to thank you and the council for your service. You've taken it seriously. You take weeknights off and go in meeting rooms, and now I'm sure on Zoom calls, and always provide us a depth of comment that reflects the seriousness that you take your role in, and just want to thank you for all the work you've done, not just for this particular item, but for the past 8 years that I've been involved.
Thanks, John. I want to do a shout out to the council. When we got to the council, we were all new. Governor Schweitzer had basically decided to appoint an all-new council. Up until that point, there had been basically no sort of plan or coordination of how the long-term use of these funds was going to be determined. And for at least 3 years, we didn't just have quarterly meetings or every 2-month meetings. Sometimes we had meetings a couple of times a week, it seemed like, because we realized that this was a huge obligation that we had to get a long-term comprehensive plan. So what I want to say is I want to commend those members, I think it was all 8 of us that were on that council from the beginning. And I think 5 or 6 of us are still there 11 years later, still working on it. But I need to, extend the shout out for me to the other council members. They have done an absolutely fabulous job. And it's been a joy to work with everybody. We all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different parts of the watershed, but we find ways to collaborate and reach agreement on things so that for the most part, we have almost unanimous decisions on every point because we've learned how to work together.
So at this point, Madam Chair, we will look for a motion from the council on this funding amendment.
Do you have language, Doug? Do you have language that you want to propose?
We don't have specific language. We have the AC motion that was proposed here. That's what we were starting with. Miranda can, if people are interested, and then post it if there is a motion out there, so that people can see the motion that is being voted on.
Well, Doug, I having talked with you yesterday a little bit about this, I'll start out. I'm going to take the so if you look at your agenda, top of the second page, there's an italic motion that is recommended. I would just start that sentence at the due to extraordinary circumstances in terms of funding difficulties due to the pandemic, the amount of $1 million of the UCFRB Restoration Fund grant project access to the CFWEP Education Fund. And it does not constitute a change to the 2012 final process plan. That language, if you are listening close and looking at it, I didn't say the first parcel, which was to allocate a one-time funding. I think that's redundant. I just really want to focus in on due to the extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves in today, we are making this allocation. That is a very unique proposal that's hopefully we won't have a pandemic again while we still have money. And so I think that's kind of doubling down with the one time only. I think it's probably sufficient to just call the pandemic the source of why we are going to support another couple of years, 3 years of funding here. And the other reason is I simply don't want to put a specter over the council should they ever consider funding it again, that somehow this tripwire would impact the future decisions of trustee councils of the next governor-elect. So I just thought maybe just kind of focusing on the COVID issue as opposed to the one-time funding, I'd support that. So that same sentence just started due to.
And I would second that.
friendly amendment. I think the verbiage needs to be, you still need to have a verb to allocate and then just delete one-time funding. Because we don't, there's no verb in there about allocating funds.
Sure. Due to the pandemic, to allocate in the amount of $1 million of the Upper Clark Fork Restoration Fund to the Clark Fork Watershed. Yeah, so that's good catch. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm being a lawyer.
That's very good. Somebody has to read this sentence in the future. Might as well have a complete sentence.
All right, we have that. Madam Chair, I would ask for any trustee restoration discussion of this motion now.
Having made the motion, it looks like pretty dark in here, doesn't it? Oh, maybe I'll move my chair, get the light turned back on. There it is. I just would commend the program. There's this time that you have to really build a solid private foundation funding will be a big challenge, but your words about how important the scientific approach and bringing education about our Montana resources into the classroom are heard strongly by this director and really support your efforts.
Madam Chair, I see Director Williams has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair and other members. I would support, or I do, obviously by seconding, support this motion. I agree that while there's a hope that this type of funding is not needed in the future to the same degree, I don't want to tie others' hands unnecessarily. And I recognize, as the motion does, the pandemic has put everyone in a very different type of situation, and that this education, I think, is just so important and should be part of what we all do. So I just wanted to explain why I'm in support of the motion. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion of the council? Seeing none, Madam Chair, I would like to open the meeting to public comments. If there's anybody from the public that would like to comment on this motion, if you'd please raise your hand. I do not see anybody raising their hand, but I will ask again if there's anybody from the public that would like to make a comment. If you'd please raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, speak up. We will take your comment at this time. Seeing none, Madam Chair, I'd like to poll the council at this time for a vote on this motion.
Please.
We'll start with Director McGrath. If you would please unmute yourself. And
Got McGrath votes yes.
Director Tubbs.
Yes.
Director Williams.
Yes.
And Chairman Summer Flanagan.
Yes.
So that the motion does pass.
Don't I get to vote?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry about that. Director Rosbeck, I'm sorry.
Not
Chairman
director,
Rosbeck.
chairman.
Chairman Rosbeck.
Yes.
Thank you, Bill, and I apologize for that. Not the first mistake we've made together, so. Yeah. Madam Chair, that does conclude the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program funding amendment. So that does pass. The next item on the agenda is the Butte Area 1 2020 amendment, and I am going to turn this over to Ray Vinke, who is the Natural Resource Damage Program environmental scientist in our Butte office. Ray started with us this past summer, and it has been his a lot of this work with this amendment has been a lot of what Ray has done, but it's also been very useful to him, I believe, because it's also brought him up to speed on a lot what's going on within the Butte Area 1 Superfund site. So at this point, I will turn it over to Ray Vinke.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Trustee Restoration Council. As Doug mentioned, I will be discussing our 2020 amendment to the Butte Area 1 Restoration Plan, as well as our draft response to comment plan. This plan was prepared in close cooperation with the Butte Natural Resource Council with their prompting, and I guess I'd just like to acknowledge their assistance. Go ahead, Miranda. All right, so restoration in Butte Area 1 is guided by the initial plan, which was prepared in 2012, as well as 3 amendments and the recently signed consent decree. This Butte Area 1 amendment essentially is created to direct where incoming funds would be allocated. So that, go ahead, Miranda. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to give a brief overview, and there's detailed materials in your packet. Our revisions fall into 4 categories. There are technical administrative revisions, revision to the allocation of future streamside tailings operable unit remediation access funds, and revision to the allocation of future reimbursements that may come into the restoration fund. Also, we offer revisions to the small projects category and how remaining funds would be spent. Go ahead, next. So our administrative revisions, they're reflected in attachment A to our proposed amendment. These revisions don't have any change in the overall direction of the restoration plan. They're just directed to incorporate the new amendment, make some minor corrections, and essentially do some clerical cleanup. So we also, within these technical administrative revisions, respond to a comment that Butte, Silver Bow County, and the EPA had relative to recent monitoring work in the Parrot area. So thank you. That would be the Parrot tailings. Go ahead, Miranda. All right, so the revisions to the allocation of the STOUE, the Streamside Tailings Operable Unit Remediation Excess Funds. As proposed, what we do is in 2020, there'd be $500,000 that would be allocated to investigate opportunities to integrate restoration and remediation. In 2019, those needs were not anticipated and examined. So in 2020, we've proposed to allocate $500,000 to integrate future restoration and remediation opportunities. We'd also leave $2 million in the stream restoration category as those funds were allocated in 2019. Next. All right, so here's what this simply what the change would be here for the allocations of the SSTOU remainder. We'd now allocate $500,000 to Upper Silver Bow Creek integration and retain $2 million for stream restoration. Next. Go ahead, Miranda, if you're. All right. So our third category of funds that we want to, or changes that we propose in the 2020 Butte Area 1 Restoration Amendment is how reimbursements that may come into the Butte Area 1 fund would be allocated. These reimbursements are changed from how they were in prior amendments and reflect those changes. So 30% of potentially incoming funds would go to the Upper Silverbow Creek corridor. Those funds would be used on waste removal at Diggins East, north-south tailings, and Butte reduction works. All of these within the Butte operating unit. So 15% of reimbursements would be allocated to revegetation and 35% to stream restoration. Those would be spent consistent with the 2019 amendment, and 20% to recreation as per the initial restoration. So those are funds that may come into the Butte Area 1 as remaining from after remediation actions. Go ahead. All right, so in orange, you will see our changes compared to the 2019 amendment, what we agreed upon with BNRC. And you'll notice that there's additional funding given to waste area improvements, revegetation. That was in response to comments from Butte Silverbow. And as I mentioned, we provide $500,000 to integration of restoration and remediation efforts in the Upper Silverbow Creek corridor. Go ahead, Miranda. All right, so this table here shows how the actual fund balances would be affected by the proposed 2020 amendment. This summarizes the table I just presented essentially in dollars and cents. Okay, good. So the small projects category, we did have a call to make some changes in terms of how remaining funds would be used that within that small projects category. The BNRC had already approved $100,000 for recreational planning at the Molten Reservoir, as well as $100,000 at the Bonanza Dump BMX Park. So those funds would be retained. Also, we proposed that $50,000 be allocated for recreational planning with Butte Silverbow County, specifically for trail system planning that would be coordinated with the Parks and Recreation Department. Also, from those remaining funds in the small projects category, $193,000 would be allocated to stream restoration. All right, so I will summarize here our response to the comments on the Butte Area 1 restoration plan. We offered the opportunity for the public to comment over a 30-day period. We used our standard routing list, which included area newspapers. And in response, we received 2 comment letters, one from Butte Silverbow County and one from the EPA. So we broke our comments, the comments down on the Butte Area 1 restoration plan to 6 categories based on their comment, and and responded to those comments individually. So Butte's initial comment was on our table 2 within the amendment document itself, and essentially what they asked was that we clarify that table, that we make some corrections to better reflect the fund balances after the 2019 and 2020 amendments would occur. There was just a correction in terms of the presentation of the table, no actual changes relative to distribution of the funds. We really appreciated Butte Silverbow's comments. We made those changes per their input in table 2 of the amendment document. So the revegetation and how to fund additional revegetation efforts in Butte within Butte Silverbow operating unit. They were a topic of interest to Butte Silverbow, and they requested that we increase the reimbursement from the consent decree for revegetation from 5% to 15%. It was their perspective that the existing allocation of funds that would come into the BAO Restoration Fund would not be sufficient. After extensive discussion with the Butte Natural Resource Council, their Natural Resource Damage Program, and Butte Silverbow County, we found that that proposal made sense, and within this 2020 amendment proposed that. So Butte Silverbow also requested that any funds that might come into that may be reimbursed to the BAO, that if they're not used for integration of restoration and remediation of Silverbow Creek, that those funds should go to revegetation. It's our perspective that since project associated with remediation in Upper Silverbow Creek will not occur will not be completed for 5 years or more, we think decisions relative to how those remaining funds that may come into the account should be spent, be made in the future. So we can't very well know how to proceed with restoration before remediation has been completed. At least would be most successful. So next comment. So Butte also had comments relative to how stream restoration should be funded within the greater Butte area. And what they request is that funds upstream of Father Sheehan Park in town, that restoration projects upstream of the park be funded from the Upper Clark Fork River Basin funds, and the downstream that they be funded with restoration dollars from Butte Area 1. We actually don't see the need to do that. This 2020 amendment is directed towards allocations of incoming funds. It's not directed towards any revisions or amendments in terms of how the stream restoration category would function. So all portions of Blacktail Creek and Silverbow, those are already being addressed under and they have dedicated funding from the 2019 amendment, Blacktail Creek and Basin Creek too. One, I guess, important feature of all of our plans is that we have flexibility to coordinate funding as needed, and we believe that will deliver the best outcomes for natural resource restoration for our publics. Another item I think that's important is essentially the EPA still has not identified all the remedial actions that would occur in west side soils. And as a result of that, again, we feel it's too early to direct funds to that area and how they would be assigned. Go ahead, Miranda. Next. Yeah, all right. So Butte noted that they concurred with our proposed allocations for the small projects, that they were in concurrence with our proposed direction, the 2020 amendment. Okay. So, yeah, so relative to the description of injury, specifically the parrot in Butte Area 1, there were different perspectives from the EPA and Butte Silverbow than what the NRDP described in our attachment A. That attachment, again, provides additional detail and clarification to some items. So in that attachment A, Butte Silverbow and the EPA were not in entire agreement with with our findings from initial monitoring at the parrot site. As a result, what we decided to do was to, within our document, to reference the full report, everything that's been work that's been funded by Natural Resource Damage Program to date, the parrot, and to direct the reader to look at the actual conclusions and data there. We thought that would be the best approach. One, it is important that all the incoming data to date that Natural Resource Damage Program has gathered as part of the conceptual site monitoring report, it does show that the parrot is the primary source of historic mine waste contamination, and that contamination is discharging and contaminating the creek's surface water. So the direction of, millions of funds that we're now spending in terms of the remediation at the parrot is appropriate, and an appropriate way to direct our funds is our conclusion. Next. Yeah, so the EPA also mentioned that they appreciated the comments by the Citizens Environmental Technical Committee, and they specifically the comments of the CTEC on the 2020 plan amendment. Just one clarification: CTEC did not submit comments on the 2020 amendment. That's which predominantly addresses allocation of incoming funds. What they actually did do is make comments on the initial parrot monitoring report. Those comments, in those comments, CTEC requested that additional data be collected and analysis of remedy in contaminated groundwater, its fate and transport, along with its impacts to Blacktail and Silverbow creeks. So CTEC encourages additional data collection and analysis. The Natural Resource Damage Program is in agreement with CTEC, and we strongly support the EPA requiring British Petroleum and Atlantic Richfield to collect all the necessary data as requested by CTEC. That would inform a future remedy. So based on our public comment, as well as consideration, extensive internal consideration of the 2020 approach to the 2020 restoration plan, we did offer a Natural Resource Damage Program recommendation, and that would be to adopt the document as we've proposed it to date, but we would substitute table 2. So that's the corrected revegetation table that we developed with Butte Silverbow. And we would also reference the parrot tailings monitoring report in attachment A, rather than spelling out its conclusions. So those are based on our public comment. That would be our recommendation. With that, we have considered a potential motion for the Trustees Restoration Council, but I would offer the opportunity first for the Trustees Restoration Council to discuss that motion and ask any questions of staff that might be helpful. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. Madam Chair, this is Doug. I would at this time ask if the council has any questions of Ray. And it actually might be helpful right now also, Madam Chair, if Elizabeth Erickson with the BNRC could actually give their council's update, that might help and also create some questions from the council. So Elizabeth, if you could give the update of the BNRC on this proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. This is Elizabeth Erickson, the chair of the BNRC Council. I'd like to thank Ray for his detailed summary of what all the changes to this plan. Basically, what we wanted to do was to clean up some of the language in the plan that the plan was originally put together in 2012, as he said, and there's been a lot of things that have changed over that amount of time, and we've had a big occurrence in the basin here in that we finally have a CD. If you go back and look at the original language of the plan, we had hoped to have a CD very shortly within the time frame of passing that original plan in 2012. It's now 2020, and many things have changed since that original plan was put together. Most importantly, that we now have a CD and we have the remedy defined, and we're moving towards that design. So it gives us a better feeling for where this money can be best spent. And that was what we were trying to do with this plan, is just clean up some of that language that referred to things that would be ending in 2016, and to get the funds cleaned up. We had run a small projects fund for, since that 2012 plan, and felt that really had, it was really successful, but it was time to take the little money that was left in there, which was about $193,000, and move it into one of the other pots and close out basically that category, and use that money then in one of the other pots. So that was one of the big changes that you saw. The other thing that we wanted to do was take some of those reimbursements that could possibly come back from the blacktail work, and distribute them through the categories that were left there. So that was one of the other big things that we did. So that is pretty much the changes that were made. I know it's a little bit complicated and convoluted now, but if anybody has questions on any of it, I would be happy to answer. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Elizabeth, this is Sean McGrath, the DEQ. I think I understood that the BNRC was meeting last night or recently, and I was just wondering if y'all took any action that maybe didn't make into our packet, if there's anything additional that y'all discussed.
Thank you, Director McGrath. We have not met since the last meeting where we looked at we addressed the response to comments. So I think everything that you have here in the packet is as up to date as it can be.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the council to staff or for Elizabeth? Seeing Director Williams, did you have a question?
I don't have a question. I have a comment, though, to Madam Chair and the other members. Just, it's good to hear. I feel like too often we set in motion certain funding allocations, or we set in motion certain needs and don't always stop and revisit what makes the most sense going forward and whether we might need to rethink those percentages. And I really appreciate the input here and advice to do so.
Thank you. Director Tubbs, do you have a comment?
No, I'm good. I just wanted to thank everyone for the tremendous effort. It's a very long motion, but with the explanation provided, I think I'll through it and agree that with the consent decree, we are much closer in understanding how restoration really can be effective in the future, and look forward to supporting the motion.
Okay, Madam Chair, at this time, I would ask the council to make a motion and for a second of that motion.
Madam Chair, McGrath from DQ, I would move to recommend the 2020 BAO Plan Amendment as proposed with the substitution of revised Table 2, a reference to the Parrot Tailings Conceptual Site Monitoring Report and Attachment A, and to redistribute reimbursements to the BAO fund, increasing the revegetation category to 15% with an associated deduction of 5% from Upper Silver Bow Creek corridor and 5% from the stream restoration categories.
And I will second that motion. This is Elizabeth Erickson.
Thank you. Thank you for the motion and the second. Madam Chair, is there any discussion of this motion amongst the council? With no discussion or questions from the council, Madam Chair, we'd like to open this to public comment at this point in time. If anybody from the public has any comments or questions about this motion, if you'd please raise your hand, or if you're on the phone and you don't have the raise your hand feature, just speak up. I will make another request for public comment. Is there any public comment on this motion? Seeing none, Madam Chair, I would like to request that we take action and vote on this motion.
Yes.
Okay, we'll start with Director Tubbs.
Aye.
Director Williams,
Yes.
Director McGrath,
McGrath votes aye.
Chairman Erickson,
Erickson votes aye.
and Chairperson Summers Flanagan.
Yes.
So with that, Chairman and Council, and the public, this motion has passed, and the recommendation will go to the governor. This proposed motion, as well as the recommended motion on the CFWEP funding, will be presented to the governor either later this week or the first of next week for your information. Moving on in the agenda, Rand, if you can go to the next slide, please. And one more slide. So now, if you remember, the council is to be provided a update to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund financial report annually. And we have done this throughout in the fall, going into the winter. So once the books have closed. Once again, this is a report that you typically get from Shannon Gilski. But as I said earlier, she is out. So I will step through this financial report. I would recommend that this is in your packet where you can look at it in more detail. And if you do have any detailed questions, if you'd please contact us and we can get Shannon to answer those in the future if I can't answer those as we go through this. The next slide, please, Miranda. So this is the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund and how it has been allocated into restoration categories that were established in 2012. You have the Butte groundwater, the Anaconda groundwater, the aquatic and terrestrial resources, and the aquatic and terrestrial reserve funds. So if you have to start at the top, this is the original allocation in 2013. If you remember, in 2018, we did do a revision to this so that we are actually also looking at our cash and invested cash balance so that we can actually have a better ability to take this to zero. The middle part of the table actually talks about and provides a summary of the interest that has been earned within each of these categories. These categories per the 2012 process plan, each restoration category gets its own interest from the principal. So the amount of money that's left in that, in the balance of that, gets that percentage of interest. So it's actually works out pretty well there. In the last, under the last gray line is the summary of the expenses from 2013 through 2020. These are broken out into expenses that we have spent as a program on projects, or also the expenses basically from administrative costs. If you look through that, you know, Butte on their groundwater plan has spent a little over $26 million. Most of that was spent on the Basin Creek Water Treatment Plant. Anaconda has completed their contract. They have spent the $10 million that was allocated to them plus the interest. They completed that last year and have done a very good job of implementing their restoration plan. The aquatics, there's two divisions of the aquatics, the flow portion and the non-flow portion, or where we're working on the watersheds. We spent approximately $14 million out of the aquatics on various projects. Same thing with the terrestrial, about $16 million have been spent on terrestrial projects. As you recall, most of that has gone to acquisitions and that type of thing, which will be summarized in a little bit. But at the end of the day, you know, we started in 2013 with a invested cash value about $104 million, and today at the balance of that, or actually the balance of at fiscal year 20, which was back at the end of June, there's about $63.6 million in the restoration fund allocated to these various categories. Next slide, please. The Upper Clark Fork Fund also has some encumbered funds, much like we talked about with the CFWEP funding. There's the grants projects, as I said, between 2001 and 2011, 120 grants were funded through that period of time. In 2013, there was about $24 million of encumbered funds, so not all of the projects had spent all their money. At this point in time, we are down to about $7 million still of some encumbered funds, of a handful of projects that are still either in a maintenance establishment or a maintenance program, or still implementing part of their projects. It's just taking longer than expected, possibly. We have the Dutchman Fund, These are the wetland funds. These were the funds that were settled in the 99 settlement that were allocated to wetlands. The program is working closely with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and allocating these dollars to create, preserve, and enhance wetlands on state property within the Upper Basin. And right now we're focused on the Milltown State Park area and the Spotted Dog area. Another category here that shows up in white is the Warm Springs ponds. Out of the 2019 amendments, DEQ is releasing some of the SST dollars, or the Streamside Tailings Operable Unit dollars. 2.5 is going to the Butte Area 1 stream restoration category, and the other 2.5 is actually going to this category, the Warm Springs ponds, to investigate restoration opportunities at Warm Springs ponds in the vicinity. Next slide, please. So one of the big changes in the restoration fund in the last year has been a reallocation of some funding from the Upper Clark Fork River Basin to the Parrot project to ensure that the funds are available to implement that project and for that to be successful. And this is just a summary of how the funds were transferred. About $13.2 million was transferred from the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Fund to the Parrot, and about 5.3 were transferred out of other categories in the BAO fund to the Parrot fund. Initially, the Upper Silverboat Creek category that had $10 million in it within the BAO is also went to the Parrot fund as well. So a total of 18.5 was allocated from other allocations to the Parrot fund. Next slide, please. And this is a summary of some of the other funds that NRD holds within the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. As you just heard, the Butte Area 1 funding amendment, their balance is in a invested cash balance is about $6.4 million. For the Clark Fork River Operable Unit, the dollars allocated specifically to that operable unit is about $26.7 million. For Smelter Hill or the Anaconda Uplands area, about $9 million remains in that. And then in the Parrot Fund, there's about $21.6 million in that fund, but that will be that the Parrot Fund will be going down quite rapidly here as we are about Jim Ford and Harley and Catherine have the Parrot Project Phase 2 out for bid at this point, and that bid closes within the next 2 weeks. So we'll know more readily of how much of that $21 million will be available to be reimbursed to the funds. But we won't know that until the bids come in and some other work is done. But that is an exciting part right now with the Parrot being out to bid. With that is the conclusion of my summary of the financial report. Does anybody have any questions of me on the financial report? All right. Director Tubbs, do you have a question?
No questions here. I'm just letting you know that somebody's still out there.
Okay, thank you very much. So hearing no questions of me, if you guys do have questions of Shannon, please feel free to let me know what those comments are or questions are, and I will pass those on to her. Madam Chair, we would like to open it up to the public to see if they had any questions on the financial report. Are there any questions from the public? I appreciate there's no questions on that. But if you do have questions, as I said, please let us know. Be happy to have Shannon help reply to any questions that anybody has on the financials. So the next slide, please, Miranda. So now I'm basically going to turn the agenda over, the slideshow over to Natural Resource Damage Program environmental scientist staff to run through the update of the projects that we have implemented in the aquatic and terrestrial avenues in the Upper Clark Fork. So I believe the first one up is Brian Barkoyak to talk about some flow projects.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. So just to want to go to the next slide when you get to it, Miranda. So just to give a brief overview of some of the aquatic flow projects we've been working on. Unfortunately, we're not able to negotiate a release from Silver Lake in 2020, but we continue to work with our project partners and continue discussions with Butte Silver Bow for future releases. We have been working with Anaconda on evaluating in-stream flow potential of water rights associated with Hearst Lake just outside of Anaconda. There are two springs identified, one on Mill Creek and one on Warm Springs Creek, and we're looking at those for in-stream flow potential and habitat. One of the projects that we're pretty excited about, and we do understand that there's significant challenges with us. We've been working with the U of M and the Clark Fork Coalition to evaluate the possibility of short-term water leasing projects in the Upper Clark Fork. We do have water rights associated with the purchase of the Clark Fork River Ranch, and we're assessing those for in-stream flow potential. And we continue to work with agencies and project partners to look at water management in the upper basin and ways to increase flow and decrease temperature. And we continue to be on the lookout for any property going up for sale, particularly property with good water rights in the upper basin, and continuing monitoring of the Upper Clark Fork to just better understand what's going on and also meet the requirements of our project implementation. Next slide, Miranda. As a follow-up to one of the projects that was approved last year, the change authorization for water rights associated with Dry Cottonwood Creek Ranch was approved, and we now have just over 9 CFS of in-stream flow between July 15th and September 6th. We are working with the last water user on the Helen Johnson ditch to fill in the ditch and replace it with a pipe system. We'd like to thank DEQ for coordinating this work with their cleanup of the Upper Clark Fork. We've spent a good time filing numerous severance and abandonment forms for the potential sale of the Dry Cottonwood Creek Ranch, which Greg will touch on in a little bit. For plans for 2021, we got some change applications coming in, one for Dry Cottonwood Creek water rights, about 4 CFS, and one from water rights associated with the former Deer Lodge River Ranch property and the Racetrack Pond property. Next slide. We did get the final change orders from DNRC for the Harvey Creek Flow project. Again, this is a project that was approved for funding last year. The ranch is currently moving forward with the infrastructure improvements, and this will eliminate 6 diversions that prevented passage and entrained fish. And then I think the last slide, Miranda. NRD has worked with the stored water users at Racetrack Lake. We've completed the required dam safety inspection, updated the O&M plan and the emergency action plan. Our project partner, the Clark Fork Coalition, has worked really hard and reached a settlement agreement with most of the Racetrack water users. This agreement still needs to be approved by DNRC, but fingers crossed, after almost 10 years, we might have a release from Racetrack Lake in 2021. And that concludes my update. on flow project. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
So are there any questions for Brian from the council?
None here, but good work, Brian.
Thank you very much, Director Tubbs.
So seeing that, none there, we will move to Elisa Stickney, who will talk about projects associated with, we either call them non-flow or what the tributary or watershed work that is occurring.
All right, so the Natural Resource Damage Program has targeted 17 watersheds for work in the 2019 update to the plans. The development and implementation of projects on the non-flow aquatic projects in priority watersheds includes protecting and enhancing riparian habitat, improving fish passage, reducing fish entrainment, and improving in-stream habitat. These projects are being accomplished via contracts and task orders between Natural Resource Damage Program, property owners, our project sponsors and partners, the Clark Fork Coalition, Trout Unlimited, and the Watershed Restoration Coalition, and various engineering firms. In order for these projects to come to fruition, these projects need continued landowner contacts, evaluation of current riparian and in-stream habitat conditions, evaluation of passage and entrainment issues, prioritization of restoration actions, development of restoration project designs, and implementation of restoration projects. So our scientists did six projects, some of which are ongoing right now for construction projects for entrainment and fish passage. Cottonwood and Baggs Creek was approved last year, but it was finished in December, so that was done, a fish screen. Milk Creek infrastructure was just completed in November 2020. It was the fish screen installation and some other infrastructure improvements. At O'Neill Creek, there was a Fishwife and Parks. Fishwife and Parks replaced a failing culvert with a bridge. There was Future Fisheries and DNRC money contributed to that. It was built in October 2020. Browns Gulch, the Brothers Diversion, the construction is taking place right now, replacing 2 culverts. Rock Creek, the Bornson-Marletto diversion, it's under construction right now, replacing a headgate, screen, and flume. So that's happening right as we speak. And then Flint Creek was Miranda, you could perhaps go to the next slide. The Flint Creek project is the Allendale diversion it's a combined project with the Allendale diversion and some private diversions. It was prioritized in the 2012 restoration plan. It was Fishwife and Parks' #1 priority in Flint Creek. We essentially, about 50% of the fish were getting entrained in a large canal. We've been working with DNRC since 2015 on evaluation and design, and that agreement was amended to include construction. And then we incorporated private user diversions and screen repairs based on proximity to Allendale. So both of these are fish passage and entrainment projects, 2 diversions and 4 screens total. It's about a $3 million project, all of which has been funded by the Natural Resource Damage Program. Construction began in October 2020, and it is slated to end in April 2021. So a lot of the construction projects are just happening because when the water's low, and they're doing them now. Next one, Miranda. So we have 8 projects that are in design for entrainment and fish passage, everywhere from conceptual to final phases, and we're to construct these projects in 2021. The Basin Creek Infrastructure Project is one of them. Another one, Blacktail Creek. There are 2 projects, Butte Golf Course, and it is going through permitting right now with Clomer and FEMA. And combined with the Butte Silverbow sewer line. Blacktail Creek, Roosevelt Drive culverts are also being addressed. On Browns Gulch, conceptual designs are being prepared for 4 diversions. That the next step will be final. On Cottonwood Creek, we're designing 4 diversions there in the conceptual evaluation phase. On Cottonwood Creek, the lower Applegate diversion is also under design. Warm Springs Creek, Silver Lake infrastructure also under design. And then on O'Neill Creek, we're looking at designs for a entrainment for a irrigation ditch. Next. We have 2 ongoing riparian restoration projects, one at Blacktail Creek at Roosevelt Drive, integrating restoration with replacing culverts in the Roosevelt Drive area. On the Little Blackfoot River at the DW Beck Ranch, there's damage in 2018 from high flows, and essentially we'll be looking at fixing an avulsion in that creek. Next. So we have a number of ongoing studies. The Clark Fork River that's the only one that's not on a tributary that is in this list. The Dutchman Wetland Complex is a source of nutrients. U of M and NRDP contractors are working on it. There's been a large National Science Foundation grant and a working group established. That's one of the bigger studies. We've also been studying Racetrack Creek, trying to assess what's going on there. Basin Creek reroute, another one that we're sort of in feasibility of studying the rerouting of Basin Creek south of the airport into Blackdale Creek. And then on Gold Creek, also trying to assess what's going on at Gold Creek. Next. Next one. Okay, there we go. So we also have ongoing monitoring on all the annually Fish, Wildlife and Parks monitors all the priority streams in the basin. Just a couple that we wanted to call out. We're monitoring on Browns Gulch, and then on Boulder Creek, Olson and Lundgren diversions. Those were ones that were done previously and we're now in the monitoring phase with them. And that's that's my presentation. So if anybody has any questions, I'll turn it back over to Doug.
Director Williams, you have a question?
A comment, just thank you for that. It's always good to hear, and just amazing projects, studies, monitoring. So just appreciate it. Appreciate our partnership very much so.
Yes, thank you. Without the partnership, a lot of the work we do would not be feasible. So if there are no other questions, next I would go to Greg Mullen for an update of the terrestrial restoration projects.
Thanks, Doug. Hello, everybody. Nice to be talking with you all. Next slide, please, Miranda. So I'm going to give a terrestrial update, and I'm going to start with the land acquisitions that we worked on this year. The big one was the Stumptown addition to the Granite Mountain Wildlife Management Area. Worked closely with Fish, Life and Parks. This was a great project. It's only 1.5 miles from Anaconda. It's 600-acre addition to the WMA, and we used restoration funds, about 85% of the $1.7 million purchase for this project. Also working at the present time with Dry Cottonwood Creek Ranch, trying to sell the ranch. If you remember, several years ago in 2018, we purchased the ranch. Since then, we put a conservation easement in place that meets our restoration goals, and it's been on the market for about 1.5 years, and now we're getting some actual potential offers at this point in time. And again, when and if we do sell that ranch, we'll have the easement in place in perpetuity. Also working with Fish, Life and Parks on a fishing access site. It's a long one. It's 6 miles long for Garrison to Phosphate, and we already have some matching funds for that secured. So that'll be a fun project that we'll be working on this winter. Next slide, please, Miranda. I have a total of 6 slides, by the way. We took a tour with the advisory council back in April of the Stumptown addition that I just mentioned. This is at Warm Springs Creek. The parcel purchase includes almost a mile of Warm Springs Creek near Anaconda. Next slide, please, Miranda. We also work on not only land acquisitions and easements, but we also do habitat enhancements on private ranches. Wildlife doesn't just stay on federal land or WMAs; they're on private ranches too. So we have quite a program we're developing, working with private ranches on livestock and riparian protection, conifer encroachment removals to enhance wildlife habitat. And right now we're completing some riparian work on 3 ranches, but some bioweed control as well. So wildlife habitat enhancement. Now, next slide, please. And here's a picture of a rock crossing on a small stream near Phillipsburg. Next slide, please. And recreation projects. We're working on several at the present time. The old Yellowstone Trail is, we completed that at the end of 2019, early 2020. That trail follows an old railroad bed. It goes from Garrison to Grant Coors Ranch. So we finalized that, and now we have we're working on design for 4 more miles of that. That will go all the way to Deer Lodge. We just started a project in Drummond, Kiwanis Park, and that will be completed this year. That's a smaller project in the $35,000 range. And we want to mention that Milltown State Park is going really well. Had, I believe, close to 100,000 visitors in 2020. So that's really exciting. And then the next and last slide, Miranda, is a photo of on the old Yellowstone Trail that I just mentioned. This sign, a photo of the sign of that trail. So with that, I am done with the overview of the terrestrial projects.
And with that, we are not going to show the video here, but we would like to point the council out to at our website, at the NRDP website. There are a number of videos. There are a couple of videos of some projects that we have had. Our partners have we've cooperated with our partners to do some videos, interviewing landowners as well as construction workers working on these projects. Kind of some nice videos on what is going on out there. So with that does conclude the presentation on the updates. Are there any council questions of any of the project managers on the update?
This is Bill. I can't seem to raise my hand. Can I make a comment?
Yes, you can, Bill.
Yeah, I think it's obvious from the presentations, the great presentations made by the NRD staff today. These projects are incredibly difficult and require intense collaboration, cooperation among various types of private and public landowners, different agencies, federal, state, etc. I'm sure that some of the projects that we talked about today that are either being finished or close to finished were projects that basically came initially out of the 2012 comprehensive plan. And it just shows how much dedication it takes to keep these projects going and to make them ultimately happen. And I think that although we on the council, can sort of applaud, pat ourselves on the back, I think we all need to give a huge accolade to the great staff at NRD that has done an incredible job collaborating with, our public partners, our public partners and our private partners, Clark Fork Coalition, stream access people, etc. It's just, it's been so rewarding to watch these things start as somebody's idea. When we started some of these projects, the initial thing was you could, if you thought you had an idea from a project, you could put it on a napkin and send it in. Well, at one point, I think Doug had this huge spreadsheet with 80 different flow projects, I think at one point. And to have filtered these out, set the priorities, found the ways of getting all of the partners and collaborators together to get these jobs done. It is so gratifying to me to watch and to hear how successful they have been. And I just think we all need to thank all of the great staff at NRD for the great work they've done for the many years that I've been watching.
Hear, hear.
I speaking for the staff, I do appreciate your words, Bill, but I also would speak for the staff and say that we would not be completing or implementing these projects without the collaboration of all of our partners, including the folks on the phone. So I would consider all of these we projects, and it's a we success. So.
Yeah, I hope I didn't misspeak. I think that's exactly right. And I didn't mean to say that this was only NRD that got this done. I think it's NRD working in very close and dedicated collaboration with lots of different partners.
Well, thank you.
I'll jump in there because Bill, NRDP doesn't necessarily get the spotlight. Each one of our larger departments have public information officers, and we'll put out press releases, and oftentimes there's some glue behind the scenes called the NRDP funding program that doesn't get highlighted. This is certainly a time where we can recognize the great staff work of the NRDP program.
And this is Elizabeth. I'd just like to second what you guys are saying. The NRDP staff on this BAO amendment went above and beyond in a very short time frame and really helped us get that done. And they have done that over and over again on everything that we've brought to them. And I just can't say enough about what they do. So Doug's being modest, and I know there's a lot of other people on the phone and they get these things done, but this staff is great and we really appreciate it.
Hear, hear.
This is Harley. I just thought I'd jump in. I do have a cameo role here. Although, as you can see, the staff of the program makes my job pretty easy on days like this. I really want to, and I'm probably going to echo or repeat some of the things people have already said, but express the program's appreciation and my appreciation for all of the support and perspective and insight that the members of this council have provided us over the years, both in their role here on the TRC as well as on the policy committee. Meetings that we've had where we've had to tackle some difficult issues and complicated, Rubik's cubes type issues, and really we all have appreciated every bit of your insight and expertise. I look back, I've only been here 4 years, and frankly, at this point in time, I think this has been the best job of my career. I just feel fortunate working with this great group of professionals and doing the work we do. But, this TRC, and not all of you have been around for the full 8 years, but, if you look back at the span of the program and what we've accomplished over that period of time, it's just been phenomenal. And so, let's all pat all of ourselves on the back. We've all pulled together to do a wonderful job. I think we've served the people of Montana well. I do want to kind of follow up on one thing, which is, we've always tried to cultivate and value our relationships with each of your agencies. And, you know, what I'd like to ask you to do is to thank back your people that we've worked with over the years for all of their contributions as well. I think that also has to be noted. And if you all could do that for us, we'd appreciate it. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Doug, this is Miranda. I just wanted to make a correction to your statement about the video. These are not on our website yet. I'm working on getting them on there. So if you're looking for those, they're not quite on our website just yet.
Thank you, Miranda. So Madam Chair, that does conclude the meeting. The last agenda item is for any additional public comment. Is there any additional public comment? Seeing none.
Hey, Doug,
yes,
I'll make one comment. Just, it wasn't on the agenda, but this group is an important one to get a focus on. And I spoke to the Policy Council about this. DNRC has introduced a bill that is in drafting. It's LC 0635. It would provide an exception to permitting for water out of the Butte Mine Works under the that is tied to the consent decree. The draft is not yet available publicly, but LC 0635, we're just trying to get a sponsor now. I won't be shepherding that bill through the legislature, but what it does is provide an alternative to the permitting process of the upper Clark Fork Basin, which is a closed basin. And it would be extremely difficult to put the water that is treated and pumped from the mine works to a beneficial use under our permitting requirements for traditional waters. I think it'll get quite a bit of scrutiny, but I wanted to alert folks that are on this phone and have been involved in the Superfund cleanup and restoration program for many, many years. So A, you're not surprised, and B, that just to let you know, the purpose of that was so that should there be an opportunity to provide a beneficial use of that water for any number of purposes, this bill would allow that use to go forward. So please do, when it's available, take a look at it. And I know my staff will be prepared to answer questions as it goes to the legislature. And one more time, thanks for everything.
Thank you for that, Director Tubbs. Madam Chair, do you have anything you'd like to say?
No, just thank you so much, Doug, for handling this with such aplomb.
Thank you. And with that, before we do adjourn, we do need a motion to in a second to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Who's fastest on the mute?
Okay, so we do have a motion and a second to adjourn. Once again, we'd like to thank everybody for joining us and participating in this meeting and on these items that we did. And also thanks everybody for all their help over the years and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all the partners out there too.
Thank you all. Have a good day.